They don't fall in love with who you are. They fall in love with who you could be. There's a certain kind of person who sees the world not for what it is, but for what it might become. Their hearts are built like blueprints, their affection like renovation projects. They notice the cracks, but focus on the light coming through them. When they meet someone, they don't see flaws. They see potential, not the reality of who stands before them, but the imagined version that could exist with just a little love, a little patience, a little fixing. They say things like, "I can see so much in you," and they mean it. They fall for glimpses, a kind word, a moment of vulnerability, an unfinished story. They collect these fragments and build an entire version of you inside their mind. But the problem is that version isn't real. It's not who you are. It's who they want you to be. And the more they fall for that imagined version, the more distance grows between fantasy and truth. Psychologists call this projectional idealization, the tendency to project your hopes onto another person, mistaking imagination for intimacy. It's not love, it's construction. The potential lover becomes both architect and dreamer, loving someone not for their reality, but for the story they want to write about them. And in the process, they fall in love with an illusion, one that they built themselves. But reality always arrives, quietly and cruelly. It's the moment when the fantasy stops fitting, when the person doesn't change the way you hoped, when their truth, messy, complex, human, begins to collide with the version you created. That's when the heartbreak begins, not because they failed you, but because your illusion did. You weren't betrayed by love, you were betrayed by potential. People who fall in love with potential often have one thing in common. They grew up needing to hope. Maybe they had to imagine better versions of people just to survive them. A parent who promised to change. A friend who said they'd be different next time. A world that offered love only in exchange for patience. When love hurt, they built imagination around it. They learned that if they just believed hard enough, if they just loved long enough, things would get better. That kind of hope is beautiful and dangerous. Because when you spend your life surviving disappointment through imagination, fantasy becomes comfort. Reality feels too blunt, too finite. So you start loving people not for who they are, but for who you think they might become once they heal. It feels noble, even spiritual, to love the broken until they bloom. But what you're really doing is trying to rewrite your own story. You're trying to love someone else into giving you the closure you never got. This pattern isn't about naivety. It's about emotional repetition. Psychologists call it repetition compulsion. The unconscious drive to recreate familiar emotional experiences, hoping this time the ending will be different. You find people who need saving because saving them feels like saving yourself. You invest in their transformation because their healing represents your own unfinished hope. But potential is a mirage. It always stays just far enough away to keep you chasing. The heartbreak of loving potential is realizing that no matter how much you give, the fantasy never solidifies. You end up holding someone who fits perfectly in your imagination, but never fully in your arms. The people who love potential are often the same ones who fear being truly seen, because when you focus on fixing others, you never have to face your own wounds. It's safer to build than to be built for. You hide behind compassion, the healer, the believer, the one who never gives up. But underneath that care lives exhaustion. Because when you love someone for who they could be, you're silently teaching yourself that you too must always be in progress to deserve love. This kind of love feels selfless on the surface, but it's rooted in control, gentle, quiet control. You try to shape someone into their best self because you're terrified of what happens if they don't change. If they stay flawed, then your love feels wasted. If they grow, you can finally feel safe. You begin to tie your worth to their evolution. Their progress becomes your validation. But people aren't projects, and love isn't construction work. Over time, this kind of love erodes both people. The one being fixed starts feeling inadequate, as if they're always disappointing you. And you, the dreamer, start feeling resentful because they're not matching the version you built in your mind. The relationship becomes a silent tug-of-war between fantasy and truth. Love turns into labor. Affection becomes expectation. And slowly, both of you begin to disappear. One under the weight of not being enough, the other under the burden of always believing too much. There's another layer to this, one that hides under all the poetry. People who fall in love with potential aren't just dreamers, they're protectors. They see pain in others and want to heal it because no one ever healed theirs. They're drawn to sadness, complexity, chaos. Not because they want drama, but because it feels familiar. They don't crave perfection. They crave connection through struggle. Peace feels foreign, but brokenness feels like home. This isn't romantic. It's trauma bonding. It's the nervous system mistaking emotional intensity for intimacy. When someone triggers your need to fix, it's not chemistry. It's recognition. You're drawn to what feels familiar, even when it hurts. So, you find yourself loving people who need saving, convincing yourself it's compassion, when in reality, it's a way of avoiding your own unmet needs. But the more you try to fix others, the more you reinforce the belief that love must be earned through effort, that peace is boring, that comfort is dangerous, that being loved as you are is too easy to be real. You become addicted to potential because it keeps you busy. It keeps you from feeling your own stillness, your own grief. But love, real love, asks for surrender, not struggle. It doesn't need a project. It needs presence. Eventually, the illusion fades. You stop seeing what someone could become and start seeing what they consistently choose to be. You realize that potential isn't love. It's hope wearing a mask. And while hope can build dreams, it can't build relationships. You learn that the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop trying to rewrite their story, to stop waiting for a version of them that may never exist, to love what's in front of you, or to walk away if you can't. Healing from this pattern means grieving the fantasy. It means forgiving yourself for mistaking intensity for depth. It's realizing that wanting to believe in someone's best doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human. But there's a difference between believing in someone and believing for them. The first is support. The second is self-abandonment. And so, you begin to love differently. You start asking, who are they now? Instead of, who could they be? You choose honesty over potential, reality over projection. Because real love doesn't demand improvement. It invites presence. It doesn't ask for potential. It honors truth. In the end, people who fall in love with potential aren't naive. They're wounded optimists. They saw beauty in brokenness because they needed to. But healing begins the moment they realize they no longer have to build love from blueprints. They can let it arrive, real, imperfect, and enough.